we are now in front of the whiteboard to talk about paper structure more in detail and introduce the different terms, porosity and permeability, and later what we measure, the Gurley index. Here we have an open paper structure, and on the right, a more closed structure. In this structure, we have fibers and pores. The porosity, by definition, is a ratio of the volume of void divided by the total volume. This concept is different than the permeability that we will see later. After the porosity, now the permeability. The permeability is the ability of air to pass through the material, through the paper structure. It is defined by the Darcy law. Let's describe this law. Imagine we have a pressure difference between both sides of the material. Because of this pressure difference, the air will move and pass through the material, so through the paper web. The higher the pressure difference, the higher the velocity. For sure, we need to consider the thickness of the material, delta x, and we also need to consider the dynamic viscosity of the air. We see in this law that we have a coefficient, K. This coefficient is the scientific definition of the permeability of the material. Now let's try to enter a little bit into more detail how we measure thanks to the Gurley equipment. The Gurley equipment is presented here. The true Gurley equipment, historical one. These are two cylinders. The external cylinder is filled partly with oil. And we have an inner cylinder with an aperture on top on which we can fix the paper. Because of the weight of the inner cylinder, it will fall down and by this compress the air. That will create this pressure difference that we were talking about. For a certain duration, a volume of air will be displaced. This volume of air here will be displaced in a time t, and the velocity is linked to this ratio, volume displaced divided by time, and divided by the area of the aperture. If we introduce that term into the Darcy law, and with some rearrangement, we can link the time of measurement to different factors. The last factor, volume, area, differential of pressure, is constant and is defined by the Gurley equipment. The really first term is the dynamic viscosity. It is also constant. And in the middle, we have a term which is connected to the paper properties. So when we talk about Gurley, we should talk about permeability index and not Gurley porosity or not Gurley permeability. We should really talk about an index. Keep in mind that the higher the true permeability, okay, the lower the time. Now, let's return to our both paper structure, the open structure and the closed structure. In the open structure, it's very easy for the air to pass through the web. There is no resistance, the velocity is high, the time is low. In the closed structure, then we have a significant tortuosity. That means that the air has some difficulty to pass through the material. The velocity will be lower and the time will increase. So the Gurley index increases. Basically, a very open structure, we get a time of like 2 seconds. A blotted paper, very absorbent, is 2 seconds. And a closed structure can go up to more than 10,000 seconds. Now, let's consider an open structure on which we apply, in blue, a barrier coat. Because of the barrier, the air will not be able to pass easily through the wall thickness. It will be limited by this barrier, and this is what we develop in our paper. So we keep the core relatively open, and we limit the penetration of the resin, the air and the resin on top. I think now you know more about the different concepts. Porosity, do not confuse with permeability, and keep in mind that when we talk about Gurley, when it increases, it means that the global structure of the paper is closed. Could be inside, in the core, but could be also just on the top, thanks to a barrier.